She almost missed it. That's the thing nobody talks about afterward. In all the reports, in all the official statements the Galactic Transit Authority released 3 weeks later, they made it sound like it was obvious. Like the moment was inevitable. Like of course someone was going to notice. But I was standing 8 feet away. I had a clear line of sight to the processing desk, and I'm telling you, she almost missed it. The alien woman, a Velori, tall, pale blue skin with those deep violet irises they all have, the ones that catch light like oil on water, she was moving fast. The way they always move through Threshold Station KL9. Efficient. Practiced. That particular kind of bored that comes from doing the same thing 1,000 times. She reached across the desk, took the passport from the human male waiting on the other side of the processing barrier, and she started to run it through the scanner without even looking down. Standard procedure, 30-second clearance, move along. And then she looked down, and the whole room changed. Let me back up, because if you've never been to Threshold Station KL9, you can't really understand what kind of place this is, and you need to understand it to understand why what happened next mattered as much as it did. KL9 sits at the edge of the Varix corridor, that long, cold stretch of navigable space between the inner rim of the Galactic Compact and the buffer zone near human-settled territory. It was built 47 years ago, back when the Compact first agreed to allow human vessels transit rights through 3 designated channels. Before that, humans were restricted entirely to their own solar systems. Before that, most of the Compact didn't even believe humans were worth classifying as a sentient species in the formal registry sense. That part still stings when I think about it too long, but that's history, not the story. KL9 is a transit hub. That's the easiest way to describe it. Imagine a city built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, rotating slowly to simulate gravity on the outer rings, with the inner sections left in low-G for cargo processing and docking. The whole thing is about 3 kilometers end to end. Population on any given cycle runs somewhere between 40 and 60,000. Species from across 23 Compact member states, plus the handful of human nationals who pass through on temporary transit visas. The transit visas are the key detail, because humans don't have full transit rights. Not yet. Not officially. What we have are conditional access permits, which get renewed every 2 Compact standard years during what they call the Provisional Integration Review. Basically, the Compact looks at how we've behaved, whether we've violated any protocols, whether we've caused any incidents, and they decide whether to extend our access or restrict it further. We've been in the provisional category for 19 years. 19 years of walking into stations like KL9, knowing that the person processing your documents could reject you for reasons that don't have to be explained. 19 years of being polite, being quiet, being careful about how you stand and where you look and whether you're smiling too much or not enough. Because the Velori interpret bared teeth as a threat display, and the Nethali read sustained eye contact as aggression, and the Duvari expect you to bow slightly when they acknowledge you, but the Pelori find bowing offensive, so you have to know who you're dealing with before you move. 19 years of learning every rule, except the ones they forgot to tell you. I've been stationed at KL9 for 2 of those years, working for the Human Diplomatic Liaison Office, which sounds more impressive than it is. There were 4 of us. We handled translation, document disputes, processing delays, and the occasional situation where a human traveler did something that violated a protocol they didn't know existed and needed someone to explain why they were now being held in a secondary review room. That was most of my Mondays, honestly. The processing hall where this happened was Hall 7, the main transit corridor for arrivals coming in through docking ring. See, it's a long, low-ceilinged space, about 200 meters end to end, with 12 processing desks arranged in 2 parallel rows. The ceiling is this amber-tinted composite material that the Velori use in a lot of their architecture. It filters light in a way that's comfortable for their eyes, but gives everything a slightly golden, underwater quality that humans either love or find deeply unsettling. I'd been here long enough that I didn't notice it anymore. The day this happened, cycle 44 of the current Compact year, mid-rotation, so the equivalent of what we'd call early afternoon. The hall was busy but not overcrowded. Maybe 200 people moving through at any given moment. The processing desks were all staffed. The queue lines were running at normal capacity. I was standing near desk 9, off to the side, because we'd had a flagged document case earlier in the rotation, and I was waiting to see if the customs integration officer needed me to step back in. I had my translation tablet in one hand and a container of something that passed for coffee at the station's human-friendly commissary, which is to say it was hot, brown, and vaguely bitter, which is close enough when you're running on 4 hours of sleep. The human male came into my line of sight when he was about 6 people back in the queue for desk 7. He was unremarkable in the way that most people in a transit queue are unremarkable. Average height for a human male, maybe 180 centimeters. Dark hair, cut short. The kind of face that's lived some weather, if that makes sense. Not young, not old. Maybe mid-40s. He was wearing a gray travel jacket, worn at the elbows, the kind that has too many pockets and you can tell the person has used all of them. He had a single carry bag over one shoulder and he was reading something on a small personal device, scrolling slowly, not looking at the line. Nothing about him said anything to me. I registered him the way you register everyone in a public space, background information, filed and immediately set aside. The queue moved. He stepped up to desk 7. The processing officer at desk 7 was a Vellory female, station designation R7 operative, though the human staff called her something we decided on informally, because station designations are impossible to remember. I'm going to call her what we called her, Liz. It wasn't her name. It wasn't even close to her name. But it was a sound she'd accepted when one of the junior translation staff used it once, and she hadn't corrected him, which in Vellory interpersonal protocol is roughly equivalent to permission. Liz had been working desk 7 for 6 months. She was good at her job. Fast, accurate, no unnecessary conversation. The kind of efficiency that the Vellory Administrative Corps breeds into their station personnel from the first day of training. She processed maybe 200 documents per rotation, and she did it without the kind of small variations in expression or posture that might give you something to read. You handed her your papers. She processed them. You moved on. I'd interacted with her maybe 15 times over the 2 years I'd been stationed here. She was not unkind, exactly. She was just entirely, completely professional in a way that left no room for anything else. So when the human male stepped up to the desk and slid his passport through the receiving slot, the standard blue-gray booklet of an Earth-issued transit document, the kind our office processed disputes about regularly, I didn't expect anything to happen. Liz reached for it. Her hand moved to the scanner the way it always moved to the scanner. Automatic. Practiced. She was already looking slightly to the left at the next piece of administrative information she was filing because she didn't need to watch what her hands were doing. She inserted the passport. She started to pull up the data overlay on her processing screen. And then she looked down at the physical document. The pause. I almost missed the pause. It was maybe 2 seconds long, maybe less. But I've been working in cross-species diplomatic environments long enough that I've learned to pay attention to the pauses that aren't supposed to be there. When a Vellory processing officer pauses in the middle of a standard document scan, something is wrong. Either the document has flagged for secondary review, or there's a system error, or she hadn't put the passport in the scanner yet. I realized that a half second after I noticed the pause. She'd reached for the scanner, yes, but she hadn't completed the motion. She was holding the passport in both hands, which was unusual, because they typically handle documents with one hand, the other occupied with the interface panel, and she was looking at the cover. Vellory passports are dark green with gold embossing. Compact member state documents have their own colors, ranging from black for the Duvari to that deep red the Nethali use. Human transit documents are blue-gray with a silver compact seal on the cover, and the words Provisional Transit Authority in both English and compact standard on the inside first page. She wasn't looking at the cover. She'd opened it. She was looking at the data page, the one with the photograph, the personal information, the identification numbers. Her violet eyes moved across the page slowly. And then they stopped. That was when I set my coffee down on the document ledge behind me. The name. I want to be careful here, because a lot of people have written about what happened, and some of them have gotten the sequence wrong. So let me be exact about what I saw. Liz looked at the data page of the passport for approximately 4 seconds after her eyes stopped moving. During those 4 seconds, her expression did not change. That's important. Vellory faces are harder to read than human faces. The musculature is different. They don't have the same range of microexpressions that we do. but I've learned to watch the secondary indicators, the position of the secondary eyelid, the angle of the crest that runs along the top of the skull. For Valori, that crest isn't decorative, it's tied to their autonomic nervous system, and when they experience a sudden emotional or physiological spike, it can lift almost imperceptibly. Liss's crest lifted. Barely, maybe a millimeter, but I saw it. Then she set the passport flat on the desk surface, not on the scanner, just flat, face up, and she straightened. And she touched the edge of her communications panel with 2 fingers. That's a Valori gesture I didn't recognize immediately. I had to ask about it later. It means, roughly translated, I need a moment to verify something before I proceed. It's not an alarm. It's not a flag for secondary review. It's a personal pause signal that officers are allowed to use at their own discretion. It's almost never used. The human male looked up from his personal device. He'd noticed the pause in the standard procedure rhythm. He had the expression of someone who has been through international airports enough times to recognize when something is taking longer than it should, not alarmed, just watchful. Liss looked at him, then she looked back at the passport. Then she did something I have never seen a Valori processing officer do in 2 years at this station. She looked around the room. Not a casual look, a deliberate one. She turned her head to the left, then to the right, taking in the processing hall the way you look at a space when you're trying to get your bearings. Or when you're trying to figure out if anyone else is seeing what you're seeing. That's when I started walking toward desk 7. I didn't run. You don't run in a transit processing hall. That's one of the first things you learn, because running triggers threat response protocols in about 7 different species, and you will have a very bad afternoon if you do it. But I moved quickly, keeping my hand visible and my translation badge forward the way we're trained to do when approaching a processing interaction uninvited. I was about 4 meters away when Liss reached under the desk and pressed something. The indicator light above desk 7 shifted from the standard green to amber. Amber means Senior Processing Officer required. I stopped, because in 2 years, I had never seen that light go amber for a routine human transit document. The arrival. The Senior Processing Officer for Hall 7 that rotation was a Duvari male named Commissar Grade Veth Orlin, and if you've never dealt with a Duvari official in a formal capacity, let me tell you, they are not people you want to see walking briskly toward you with their attention fixed and their jaw set. The Duvari are the oldest member state of the Galactic Compact. They've been spacefaring for 6,000 years. They carry that history the way some buildings carry the weight of their own foundations. You can't see it exactly, but you feel it in every room they enter. Orlin was tall even by Duvari standards. Gray-green skin, the double-banded jaw structure that marks administrative class Duvari, and the kind of posture that takes decades of institutional conditioning to produce. He wore the full commissar-grade uniform, deep charcoal with silver piping, the compact seal on the left shoulder, and the Orlin family crest on the right, which I remember thinking was unusual. The family crest is ceremonial. You don't wear it to a standard processing shift. Later I found out he wore it every day. He was the kind of person who wore his family crest to process paperwork. That told you something about him, though I'm still not entirely sure what. He arrived at desk 7 in under 90 seconds of Liss pressing the amber call. He must have been nearby. He came around the back of the processing row, the officers-only corridor, and he stepped into the space behind desk 7 with the kind of contained speed that doesn't look like speed until you calculate it later. Liss spoke to him in Valori administrative dialect, the compressed, precise register they use for official communication, which my translation earpiece can handle, but which always sounds slightly like someone reading a legal document very quickly. I caught fragments. Document designation class, verification requested, please review primary identifier. Orlin looked at the passport on the desk. His reaction was different from Liss's. Where she had gone very still, he went very present. It's the only word I can find for it. Like something that had been running at partial capacity, suddenly came fully online. He picked up the passport. He read the data page. And then he straightened to his full height and turned to look at the human male waiting on the other side of the desk. The human male had been watching all of this with the patience of someone who has learned that making noise in a bureaucratic delay never actually speeds things up. He had put his personal device away. He was standing with his carry bag settled against his hip, his hands loose at his sides. His expression was calm but attentive, the expression of someone waiting for an explanation. Orlan said in compact standard, which I could hear clearly, "Your name, I need to hear you state your name." The human male looked at him steadily, and said his name, and that was when the second amber light came on. Then a third. The name, what it meant. I'm going to tell you the name, but I need to give you context first, because without the context the name means nothing, and that would be a failure of the story. 19 years ago, when the Galactic Compact was conducting the first formal review of whether to grant humans any transit rights at all, when the debate was genuinely open, when there were Compact member states actively arguing that human beings were too volatile, too aggressive, too unpredictable to be allowed into shared transit corridors, there was a single incident that shifted the vote. The incident happened at a different station, a Compact military customs facility called Reach Point Valdris. A human ship had been stopped there for what was supposed to be a routine inspection, the first such inspection under a new joint protocol, meant to demonstrate that humans could comply with Compact standards. There were 12 people on the human vessel. The inspection was conducted by a Compact security team of 48, led by a Compact fleet commander named Dross Velareth. What happened at Valdris is a long story, and parts of it are still classified under Compact security protocols. But the short version, the version that matters for what happened in Hall 7 of Kale 9 47 years later, is this. The inspection went wrong. The human ship's technical systems registered the scan protocols as hostile, a genuine misread, not an act of aggression, but the defense systems responded automatically before any human crew member could override. The Compact security team registered the activation as an attack. Weapons were drawn. In a sealed military facility, with 20 different kinds of scanning equipment running and energy readings spiking in all directions, the situation reached a flashpoint in under 4 minutes. It should have been a massacre. 12 humans, unarmed by Compact protocol, facing 48 trained Compact military personnel in a closed environment. It should have ended the entire prospect of human integration into Compact space before it even began. But there was a man on the human vessel. A human, not the captain. The captain had been taken to the secondary interview room when the inspection began, standard Compact procedure. This man was the senior systems engineer. He had no official diplomatic standing. He had no rank that the Compact recognized. He was not supposed to speak. He was not supposed to move. He moved. What he did in those 4 minutes, the specific sequence of actions, the technical understanding he used, the way he positioned himself between the Compact security team and his crew without making a gesture that any of the 7 species present would read as aggression, has been studied in Compact diplomatic training programs for 18 years. Not because it was physically remarkable. Not because he was a superhuman fighter or a brilliant negotiator in the formal sense. Because he understood in 4 minutes, in a room where everyone had a different threat response framework and a different cultural language for the same body movements, how to be completely, perfectly non-threatening to every single species in the room simultaneously, while also communicating with absolute clarity to every one of them that he was not afraid, that his people were not going to surrender, and that there was another way through this moment that didn't end with everyone's blood on the walls. He talked them down, all of them, including his own crew who were 2 minutes from fighting back out of pure instinct. The Compact security team stood down. The incident was filed, reviewed, passed to the Compact Council. 3 months later, the Provisional Transit Rights vote passed. 12 years after that, the Council commissioned an official inquiry into the Valdris incident. They wanted to formally understand what had happened, to document it as a training case. They interviewed everyone they could find. They read the incident logs. They reconstructed the 4 minutes from 17 different recording angles. And they named the man. His name went into the Compact historical registry. Not as a hero exactly. The Compact doesn't use that word the way humans do. They entered him under a category that translates roughly as architect of preserved equilibrium. Someone who, at a critical junction in the historical record, prevented a catastrophic divergence. There are 11 beings in that registry, in 6,000 years of Compact history. He was the 12th, the first human. The only one entered posthumously, because he had died 4 years before the inquiry concluded, of entirely ordinary human causes, without ever knowing that his name had been submitted for consideration. His name was in the registry, and that name, that specific sequence of syllables, was printed on the data page of the passport that Liz had taken from the human male standing at desk 7. The man himself. His name was Daniel Avery Holt. Not the man from Valdres. That man's name was Marcus Holt. This was his grandson. Daniel Avery Holt was 44 years old. He was by profession a systems engineer, the same as his grandfather, which I don't think was a coincidence, though he never said so explicitly. He worked for a human compact joint infrastructure consortium that was building relay stations along the outer edge of the Varex corridor. He had a valid transit authorization, properly issued, with all correct documentation. He was passing through Kale 9 on his way to a construction site 3 systems over. He had no idea what his name meant to compact officials. That was the part that broke me a little later when I had time to think about it. He had grown up knowing his grandfather's story, his family kept it, the way families keep things, but he hadn't known about the registry entry. The Compact Inquiry's final report had been published in Compact Standard, in databases that humans weren't granted access to as a matter of standard protocol. It hadn't been formally communicated to Earth's diplomatic offices. There was a communication failure somewhere in the interagency chain, and the information just hadn't reached the people it most directly concerned. So Daniel Avery Holt had come to Kale 9 with his worn gray jacket and his too-many-pocketed bag and his personal device he'd been reading in the queue, and he had handed over his transit document the way he'd done it a dozen times before, and he was waiting to be processed and move on with his day. He did not know that his last name was in one of the most exclusive registries in 6,000 years of compact history. He did not know that Liz had recognized it because Valori processing officers are trained on the registry as part of their certification program, not because registry holders pass through stations, but because the registry names are used as reference points in protocol training, examples of historical significance, case studies in compact human relations specifically. She'd known the name the way you know a name from a book you studied years ago. She hadn't expected to see it on a transit document. She hadn't expected it to be real in her hands at desk 7, on a completely ordinary rotation. And she had no protocol for what to do when it was. What happened next? The amber lights were the first thing. The second thing was the arrival of the other processing officers. They came the way people come when they can tell something significant is happening, but they don't want to cause a disruption, slowly from their stations, with the practiced casualness of people who are moving with purpose but don't want to look like they are. Within 5 minutes of Orlin arriving at desk 7, there were 11 processing officers in the vicinity of that desk, all ostensibly doing something else, all paying close attention. Liz had stepped back from the desk. Orlin was handling it now, but he hadn't processed the document. He was still holding the passport. He had sent a communication. I could see his secondary comms panel active, the one that runs to the station administration level. He was waiting for a response. The human male, Daniel, was watching all of this with an expression that had evolved from patient to carefully contained. He was the kind of person who'd learned to keep his face quiet in situations he didn't understand yet. I recognized it because I wore that expression a lot. I moved closer. I was close enough now that Orlin could see my translation badge clearly. He looked at me. I made the standard liaison request gesture, one hand open, the other holding my credentials flat where they were visible, and he gave me the Duvari acknowledgement. A single deliberate tilt of the head, which in their culture means approximately you may be present, your presence is noted, do not speak unless spoken to. I stopped about 2 meters from the desk. Daniel glanced at me. I gave him the smallest nod I could manage. I'm here. I've got eyes on this. You're not alone. He received that. His posture didn't change, but something in his eyes acknowledged it. And then Orlin's comms panel chimed. He read whatever came through. And then he set the passport down on the desk. Face up, carefully, the way you set down something that matters, and he straightened, and he did something that made the back of my neck prickle. He looked at the other processing officers in the area. All of them, one by one. And the first one, a Duvari junior officer at desk 8, straightened, squarely, hands at his sides, his head dropped to a specific angle. A bow. A formal Duvari bow, the full formal version, not the abbreviated acknowledgement version, but the deep one, the one that their culture reserves for registry-level significance. Head down, hands behind the back, held for a 3 count. The officer at desk 6, a Velori male, saw it. And after a half-second that I imagine contained about 6,000 calculations about protocol and propriety, he bowed too. Velori style, a slower incline of the head and upper body, the crest lowered, which for them is actually the most respectful version of the gesture. It moved through the room like something physical. Not all at once, not in unison. That's what made it different from a ceremony. It spread organically, officer by officer, each one processing what was happening and making their own decision. Some hesitated. Some, I could see them, clearly weren't sure of the protocol, weren't sure if this was appropriate, weren't sure if they were reading the situation correctly. But they bowed. Every one of them. 11 processing officers in Hall 7 of Threshold Station Kale 9, representing 4 different species, bowing to a human male who had come to the desk with a carry bag and a worn jacket, and a transit document he'd been handed at the departure port without thinking anything of it. Daniel. I watched his face. I want to be accurate about this, because people have described it differently in the accounts I've read since. He didn't understand immediately. That's the truth of it. He watched the first bow happen, and his expression showed genuine confusion, the kind where the information doesn't match any framework you currently have, and your brain is working hard to build one fast enough to keep up. He watched the second bow. He watched the third. And somewhere around the 5th or 6th, I saw the moment he began to understand that this wasn't about him. It was something in his face, a particular kind of stilling. Not shock, not pride, something quieter. The expression of someone who has just learned something that changes the scale of something they thought they already understood. He'd known his grandfather's story. He'd carried it the way families carry stories, with love and some distance and the particular softness of something that happened before you were born. He knew his grandfather had been brave. He knew the Valdris incident. He'd grown up hearing it at kitchen tables and in the small, specific way that families tell the stories they're proud of. He hadn't known his grandfather's name was in a registry. He hadn't known that on the other side of the galaxy, in a station full of species who'd been spacefaring while humans were still working out agriculture. His grandfather was in a category with 11 others across 6,000 years of history. He found that out in a transit processing hall, from the body language of strangers. I saw him absorb it. I watched it move through him. It was quiet and private, and not something I should have been watching, but I was, because I'm a human in a job where I watch things for a living, and I am not going to pretend I looked away. He swallowed once, his jaw set, he blinked slowly. And then he did something. He bowed back. Not the way he would have at a compact formal ceremony with the exact species-appropriate form. He wasn't trained for that, and he knew it. He bowed the way a human bows, head inclined. A real bow from the waist held for a breath. Then he straightened. And he looked at Orlan with steady eyes, and he said in English, and I translated quietly, almost automatically, because that's my job. Thank you, I didn't know. Orlan held his gaze for a moment, and then in compact standard, careful and deliberate, he was known. Part 2, the corridor after. What Orlan told HIM. They didn't process Daniel's passport at desk 7. Orlan escorted him, personally, which is not a thing senior processing officers do, to the liaison reception office off the East Corridor. That's technically our space, the Human Diplomatic Liaison Office. I followed because it was our space, and also because I was not going to miss the rest of this. The reception office is a small room. 4 chairs, a table, a display screen on one wall, nothing impressive. We use it for exactly the kind of situation it was being used for now, conversations that don't fit the standard processing flow. Orlan sat across from Daniel. I took the chair in the corner, translation tablet in hand, because even with Orlan's compact standard and Daniel's English, there were going to be nuances that needed bridging. Orlan told him. He told him about the Valdris incident, not the version Daniel knew from family stories, but the compact version. The version with the technical data and the incident logs and the 17 recording angles. The version that showed, precisely and specifically, what his grandfather had done in those 4 minutes. Daniel listened without interrupting. That struck me. A lot of people receiving this kind of information about a family member interrupt. They want to confirm details, express emotion, react. He sat with his hands flat on the table and he listened to the whole thing before he said a word. When Orlan finished, Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why wasn't this communicated to Earth's diplomatic office?" Orlan paused. It was a Duvari pause, very controlled, but I caught the secondary tell, a slight compression of the double-banded jaw structure. He said there was a communication failure at the interagency level. It has been noted in the internal record. But not corrected, Daniel said, not accusatory, just precise. Not yet, Orlan said. Daniel nodded slowly. My grandfather never knew. No. He died in 2041. The inquiry published in 2045. Yes. Another silence. Then Daniel said, quiet, he would have liked to know, not for himself. He would have been embarrassed, actually. But he would have liked to know that it worked, that the moment worked, that it was worth something. Orlan looked at him. His expression was unreadable in the standard sense, but I've been doing this long enough. There was something in the Duvari equivalent of contemplation on that gray-green face. He said, the entry in the registry states that without the intervention, the probability of a fatal incident at Valdres was calculated at 94.7%. The probability of the subsequent provisional transit vote passing, in the absence of a stabilizing incident on record, was 11.2%. He let that sit. Without Valdres, he continued, the current human access framework would likely not exist. The joint infrastructure consortium you work for would likely not exist. Your presence here today would likely not be possible. Daniel looked at the table for a moment, then back up. He was just trying to keep everyone alive, he said. Yes, Orlan said. That is noted in the registry entry as well. The complication. Here is where I need to tell you about what else was happening while Daniel and Orlan were in that room. Because this story has more than one thread, and the second thread was running simultaneously, and they were going to intersect in a way that nobody in that liaison office was anticipating. Hall 7 of Kale 9 had a security monitoring feed. All processing halls do. And the amber light calls, followed by the visible departure of the senior processing officer with a transit passenger, had generated an automated flag in the station's security system. The security system at Kale 9 is managed by the Transit Security Division, which is a joint compact operation, staffed primarily by Nethali, with Duvari oversight. The Nethali have the best security instincts in the compact, fast, thorough, pattern recognizing in a way that sometimes borders on unsettling. They are also extremely literal about their operational mandate, which is to investigate any flagged transit irregularity as a potential security breach until it is proven otherwise. The TSD duty officer for that rotation was a Nethali female, four-armed, the pale bioluminescent markings along her shoulders that indicate officer rank in their hierarchy, the compound eyes that never quite stop moving. She had reviewed the Hall 7 flag and determined that a human transit passenger had been removed from standard processing flow by a senior officer, in circumstances that were not logged in the standard way. That was technically and literally a transit irregularity. She dispatched a security response team. 4 Nethali TSD officers, in full transit security gear, moving toward the liaison reception office at a pace that is efficient rather than urgent, but which absolutely gives you the impression that things are about to become very formal very quickly. I became aware of this when my comms panel vibrated with a priority signal from the station security coordination channel. I looked at the notification. I processed what was about to happen. I said in compact standard to Orlan, there is a security response team incoming, ETA approximately 4 minutes. Orlan turned to look at me. His expression shifted into something I can only describe as, of course there is. Daniel looked at me too. What does that mean? It means, I said, choosing my words carefully, that standard protocol has flagged this situation as an irregularity and a security team is coming to investigate. It is not a threat. It is bureaucratic procedure. So more people who are going to know my last name. Yes. He leaned back in his chair, looked at the ceiling for a second. Then he said quietly, with a particular kind of exhausted humor in his voice, "Okay." The security team arrives. They came in exactly at the 4-minute mark. Lead officer, compact, efficient, the kind of physical presence that communicates authority without needing volume, stepped into the reception office doorway and took in the room in about 1 second. Four-armed species see everything, essentially simultaneously, and she would have processed Orlan's rank insignia, my liaison badge, Daniel's human civilian status, and the general non-threatening atmosphere of the room all at once. She addressed Orlan in Nethali-accented compact standard. "Commissar-grade Orlan, I have a flag from Hall 7 processing irregularity. What is the status of this transit passenger?" Orlan said, "The passenger is not a security concern. His documentation triggered a historical registry verification. He is being briefed." The lead officer looked at Daniel. "Name and transit authorization." Daniel told her his name. I watched her face. I was getting good at watching faces across species by this point. The Nethali compound eyes don't express emotion in a way that translates cleanly to human facial reading, but there are body language tells. The bioluminescent markings on her shoulders, which pulse slightly with her autonomic state, shifted. Very briefly. A different rhythm. She had recognized the name. I thought, of course she had. The Nethali manage security for transit stations across the compact. They are trained on historical registry entries as threat assessment context. If a name appears on a document that correlates to a registry entry, they need to know what that means and what protocol applies. She knew what Marcus Holt's name meant. She had just not expected to hear a version of it come out of a human male's mouth in a liaison office on Kale 9. She looked at her team briefly. A flicker of something passed through that look. Then she turned back to Daniel, and she straightened, and her forearms came to a specific position. 2 lowered. 2 crossed at the forearms, which I had to look up later, but which is the Nethali formal acknowledgement gesture for what their culture designates as a person connected to an act of historical significance. Her team behind her followed the same posture. "Holt," she said, "you are understood." Which is, I found out later, the Nethali way of saying, "We see you, we recognize what you carry, and we honor it." Daniel looked at her team, back to her. He said, "Thank you." And then, almost to himself, very quiet, "He was a good man." The lead officer held the formal posture for a breath. Then she said to Orlan, "No security concern registered. I will close the flag." She and her team withdrew. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Daniel let out a long, slow breath. "I really just came to catch a connecting transit to a relay station build," he said. I almost laughed. I stopped myself because it didn't seem quite right yet, but I came close. What the station director wanted. 22 minutes later, and I want you to understand that I've rarely seen Kale 9 administration move that fast for anything. The liaison office received a communication from the station director's office. Kale 9 station director was a Pelori male named Administrator Dures Kalahari. The Pelori are the second longest standing compact member, and their administrative officials are known for a particular kind of deliberate, almost ceremonial communication style. They say things very precisely, and they consider the weight of words the way other people consider the weight of physical objects. The communication was brief. It said, essentially, the station director had been informed of the situation. He wished to meet formally with the human transit passenger if the passenger was willing. He wanted to convey, on behalf of the station administration, an official acknowledgement, and he wanted to discuss whether Earth's diplomatic offices were aware of the registry entry. He was very concerned. The message said that they were not. Orlan showed Daniel the message. "This is your decision," he said. "You are a civilian transit passenger. You have no obligation to any of this." Daniel read the message on the display. He read it twice. Then he said, "Is there a way to communicate with Earth's diplomatic mission through your systems? The one on Kale 9, I mean, not through my own comms." I said, "Yes, through our office, actually." He looked at me properly for the first time, really looked, with direct attention rather than the peripheral awareness he'd been giving me while managing the bigger situation. "You're the liaison officer." "One of 4, yes." Can you connect me to someone senior in the mission? Today, before I leave for the relay station. I can try, I said. I have a priority authorization line. He nodded, then to Orlan. Tell the station director I'll meet with him, but I have one request. Go ahead, Orlan said. Whatever comes out of this meeting, whatever formal acknowledgement or communication happens, I want it to go to Earth's diplomatic mission. Not to me specifically. This isn't something that should sit in a liaison office file. This belongs to my family and to the people who make these decisions, and they need to know what they've apparently been missing for 18 years. Orlan studied him. You're not asking for anything for yourself, he said. It wasn't quite a question. No, Daniel said simply. Another pause. Then Orlan said, Your grandfather would be unsurprised. Daniel looked at him sharply. Then slowly the corner of his mouth moved, not a full smile, but something. Yeah, he said, he probably would. Part 3, the meeting and after. The station director's office. Administrator Kalahari's office was on the inner ring of Kale 9, the low-G section, which means you get there via a transit elevator that gradually deweights you as you ascend. And by the time you reach the administrative level, you're moving with that floaty half-step that low-G requires. It's disorienting if you're not used to it. I've done it enough that I barely notice, but Daniel had to adjust for about 30 seconds, finding his center of gravity in the new environment, and he did it without comment, just adapted and kept moving. The administrator's office was large and quiet, with a viewing port that looked out at the stars, the actual stars, not a display, a real viewport, which is a significant thing on a space station because real viewports are structurally complex and expensive. The starfield outside was deep and motionless the way space always is when you're looking at it from inside a pressurized environment and there's nothing moving through your field of view. Kalahari was smaller than I expected. The Pelori are a slight species, narrower than humans, with elongated fingers and a particular way of holding the head that makes them look perpetually contemplative. He was old, by the marks of his species. The skin around his eyes had taken on the translucent quality that marks advanced age in Pelori, and his hands had the specific stillness of someone who has learned to conserve their energy carefully. He greeted Daniel at the door, not from his desk at the door, which in Pelori culture is significant. It means I came to meet you. You did not come to me. They shook hands, which Kalahari initiated, because he was familiar enough with human greeting custom to know it would be appropriate. Then he gestured to the chairs arranged near the viewport, and they sat. And I sat nearby with my translation equipment running, and he spoke. He spoke for about 15 minutes. I'm not going to reproduce the whole thing because some of it covered the internal compact record that I don't have clearance to fully detail, but the core of it. He confirmed that Marcus Holt's entry in the compact historical registry was real, formal, and permanent, that it had been entered by unanimous vote of the Compact Historical Council, a body of 12 representatives, one from each of the 12 senior member states, and that unanimous votes in that body are extraordinarily rare. He said the vote had taken less than 3 minutes, which was the shortest deliberation period in the Council's recorded history. He said that the failure to communicate the registry entry to Earth's diplomatic mission was a genuine administrative failure, not a deliberate omission. He said it had been noted in the internal record 3 times over 18 years, and each time, the correction had been delayed by competing priorities and institutional inertia. He said he was personally embarrassed by this, and he used the specific Pelori word for embarrassment on behalf of an institution one represents, which is a stronger and more formal concept in their culture than the English word conveys. He said that he was going to correct it today, that a formal communication was being drafted to be transmitted through the official diplomatic channel to Earth's mission on the station, before Daniel Avery Holt left Kale 9. And then he said something that I remember word for word because I was transcribing it and because it stayed with me. Your grandfather made a decision in 4 minutes that 6,000 years of compact deliberation had never produced a framework for. He had no precedent. He had no training in compact standard de-escalation. He had no language for what he was communicating to 7 different species simultaneously. He had only his own understanding of what people need in a moment of fear, and that understanding was sufficiently universal, sufficiently clear, and sufficiently brave, that it crossed every species boundary in that room without losing a single element of its meaning. He looked at Daniel steadily. That is the rarest thing in the compact historical record. It has happened 11 times in 6,000 years. He made it 12. Daniel sat with that. The stars were outside the viewport, silent and unchanging. He said, "I want to ask you something." Kalahari inclined his head. When he died, 2041, were there any compact officials who knew his name, who remembered Valdris? Kalahari considered. Many knew the incident, the name in that context, yes. There were those who knew. Did anyone? Daniel paused, recalibrated. Is there any record of anyone from the compact acknowledging him while he was alive in any form? Kalahari was quiet. No, he said finally, there is not. Daniel nodded slowly. He looked out at the stars for a long moment. Then he would have said it didn't matter, and he would have meant it, but he stopped. But, Kalahari said very gently. But it would have been good for him to know, Daniel said. That's all. Kalahari folded his hands in his lap, his elongated fingers interlaced in that particular Pelori gesture of quiet sorrow. Yes, he said. It would have been good. The communication. The formal communication went out at 1700 station time, about 2 hours after Daniel arrived at the liaison office. I was there when it transmitted. I watched it go. Kalahari's communications officer, a young Velori female, very new to the posting, clearly processing the weight of what she was sending, initiated the transmission through the official diplomatic channel, and the header came up on our monitoring screen. From Administrator Duress Kalahari, Station Director, Threshold Station Kale 9. To Senior Diplomatic Mission Officer, Earth Provisional Integration Mission, Kale 9 Branch. Classification, Historical Registry Notification Priority, High. Subject, Compact Historical Registry, Human Entry, Formal Acknowledgement and Record Correction. The body of the communication ran 12 pages in Compact Standard. I got the translation that evening. It covered everything, the Valdris incident in full technical detail, the inquiry, the registry vote, the unanimous decision, the administrative failure to communicate, the formal apology for the 18-year delay, the official certification of the entry. And at the end, and this was Kalahari's own addition, not required by any protocol, a paragraph that read, "It is the position of this administration that the delay in communicating this registry entry to the human diplomatic mission represents a failure of institutional responsibility that cannot be fully remedied by this communication. We acknowledge that Marcus Avery Holt, the registered individual, died without receiving formal compact acknowledgement of his contribution to the stabilization of compact human relations. We acknowledge that this is a wrong. We transmit this communication not as correction enough, but as the beginning of a more honest accounting of what the compact owes to those whose actions have shaped its history, regardless of species or provisional status." I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I forwarded the transmission report to our senior mission officer with my own note attached. Please read this before you do anything else today. The goodbye. Daniel's connecting transit departed at 1900 station time. He had 2 hours after the director's office. He came back through the liaison office before he left. I was there. I'd been doing the follow-up documentation from the afternoon, which was going to be extremely detailed, and which my supervisor was going to read with very wide eyes. He knocked on the open door frame. I looked up. "I wanted to say goodbye," he said. "And thank you, you were a steadying presence in there, I noticed." "It's my job," I said, which was true and also wasn't the whole of it, and we both knew that. He smiled, properly this time, not the controlled near expressions from earlier. It was a good smile, the kind that showed up in the corners of the eyes. He said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you like this job, actually like it?" I thought about that. Most days. What about today? I thought about Hall 7, and Liss's crest lifting a millimeter, and the amber light, and 11 officers bowing one by one in a non-ceremonial hall, and a man finding out in a transit queue that his grandfather had changed the shape of history without ever knowing it. Today, I said, I think I needed to be here. He nodded like that made sense to him, Good. He picked up his carry bag, settled it on his shoulder, turned to leave. At the door, he stopped. "What was her name?" he said, the processing officer who noticed. I paused. "We called her Liz. It wasn't her real name, her actual designation is." "Could you tell her something for me?" "I can try." He looked at me. "Tell her thank you, not for the rest of it. Just for looking down." He left. I sat with that for a moment. Then I pulled up the internal station messaging system, and I drafted a note to Desk 7's assigned officer, station designation R7 operative, the Velori woman we'd been calling Liz for 2 years. I wrote, "A passenger asked me to thank you. He said, not for the rest of it, just for looking down." I sent it. Her reply came 40 minutes later. It was short. Compact, standard, precise, and formal in structure, the way Velori administrative personnel write everything. It said, "I understand. Please acknowledge receipt." I acknowledged it. And then I sat back in my chair, and I looked at the amber ceiling of the liaison office, that golden underwater light, and I thought about a man in a 4-minute window who'd kept everyone alive by understanding something that had no training program and no precedent and no framework except his own knowledge of people. And I thought about his grandson, going to build a relay station somewhere in the outer Varix corridor, with his worn jacket and his too many pockets, carrying a name that 11 processing officers had bowed to without any ceremony or planning, in the middle of an ordinary rotation. And I thought about how history works, the way it moves through people, the way it accumulates in names that get written into registries, while the people themselves live ordinary mornings and ordinary queues, and read their personal devices while waiting their turn. The way a small action, taken in 4 minutes, can echo for 100 years and still be arriving somewhere new. Epilogue 3 weeks later. I got a message from my senior mission officer 3 weeks after the KL-9 incident. He'd heard from Earth's diplomatic bureau. They'd processed the Kalahari communication. They were initiating a formal response, a compact standard acknowledgement of the registry entry on behalf of Earth's government, which required a specific kind of documentation and approval chain. They had also, my officer said, located Daniel Avery Holt's mother, Marcus Holt's surviving daughter. She was 71 years old and living in a city called Portland, in the country that used to be called the United States. She had been informed of the registry entry. My officer, who is not a sentimental person by any measure, he's been in diplomatic service for 26 years and has the particular dryness of someone who's seen a lot of things, wrote in his message. Apparently her response when they told her was to say, "Well, he always said it worked out." And then she asked them to read her the full entry, all of it. And when they finished, she said, "Good." He'd have been embarrassed, but good. I read that 3 times, too. Then I went and got something hot and brown from the commissary, and I sat at my desk, and I looked at the amber ceiling, and I didn't try to stop the feeling that was happening. It was the kind of feeling you get when history suddenly has a face, when the weight of something abstract becomes real because it attached itself to specific people. A man in a gray jacket in a transit queue, and an old woman in a city on Earth, and a Velori officer who looked down at a passport on what should have been an ordinary rotation. 3 weeks later, I got one more message. This one was from the Compact Historical Registry office directly, which was unusual, because they almost never communicate with individual station staff. It said, "Please convey the following to Daniel Avery Holt, human civilian, if contact can be established. The Compact Historical Registry Council, by vote of 12-0, has entered a notation alongside Marcus Avery Holt's registry entry. The notation reads, the individual named in this entry was unaware of this recognition during his lifetime, through failure of communication on the part of this institution. This is acknowledged and recorded as part of the permanent historical record, so that the nature of his recognition, given to someone who did not know, who did not seek it, who did not act for it, is itself preserved as part of what this entry means." I forwarded that to Daniel through the relay station communication system, marked it personal. His reply came 6 days later. "Relay stations are far out." It said, "Got this. Thank you, called my mom. She cried. I'm going to say I didn't, but I did. D." The ending line. I've thought about this story a lot since it happened. The way it started with almost nothing, almost a missed moment, almost just a name on a page that a tired processing officer nearly skimmed past. And I think that's the thing. History doesn't arrive announced. It doesn't come in through the main door with a flag and a ceremony. It comes in through the transit queue, wearing a gray jacket, reading something on a personal device, waiting its turn the same as everyone else. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, someone looks down. And everything changes. That's all it ever takes. Someone who looks down,